This is Keith McDaniel, and today is September the 9th, 2024, and I am in the production studio here at Roane County High School with Jack Adams. Good morning, Jack. How are you?
Good morning. I'm great.
Good. We've known each other a long time, haven't we?
Long time. Cherokee Hills.
Just about all our entire lives.
Yeah.
That's for sure. So, this is about you and your life and your time in Kingston and your memories and things such as that. So let's start at the beginning. Where were you born and raised? Tell me something about your family.
I was actually born in, my parents lived in Clinton when I was born. At 10 months old, January 57, we moved to Kingston, 213 Willowbrook Road in Cherokee Hills.
Yeah.
And that's where I stayed until Lisa and I married in 1982, and so I hung around Willowbrook Road for a long time, and of course that's where I know you from Cherokee Hills.
Sure, of course.
And one of my greatest memories of the McDaniel family, you remember how we used to have floods in Cherokee Hills, especially down Willowbrook.
Yep.
And your older brother fell in the ditch during one of the things, and my dad and two of the other neighbors fished him out.
Is that right?
After he went through about 3 culverts.
Oh yeah, that's a classic story.
You could hear him going through boom, 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 boom,
yeah.
boom. But
and they say that he credits surviving that by having taken swimming lessons and learned how to hold his breath.
Yeah, and probably so.
Yeah.
But Mr. White, who lived beside us, and Mr. At my time. I'm getting old.
That's all right.
The neighbor across the street, they held my daddy. They were both big men, and they held my daddy, and Dad stuck his legs down in front of the culvert, and when Steve hit his legs, he grabbed them, and the two men pulled both of them out.
Is that right?
That's how they pulled him out. Yeah.
Really? I didn't know who did that.
Yeah.
I just heard the story.
Yeah, I can remember it because, I was a little bitty kid too.
Oh, sure.
And I thought Dad was going to wash through the culvert because he wasn't a very big man. And Marksberry was the fellow's name across the street, Don Marksberry. And they held Daddy by the shoulders, and when Steve hit his legs, he grabbed him, and they jerked him all out of the creek. And everybody's driveway would wash away from driveway to driveway, and we'd take turns shoveling, our gravel out of the MERS yard.
Well, yeah.
And Miss Cooley's gravel out of our yard.
Because nobody had paved.
No, nobody had paved then. It was all gravel. Yeah,
that's for sure. So, tell me about your mom and dad. What did they do?
Mom was a homemaker until my sister started college, and then she went to Roane School of Beauty. Miss Lucille Browder had the Roane School of Beauty, and she went through the class, and of course she had known Miss Browder for a long time, and Mom went on and got her instructor's license, and she was a beauty instructor until she retired.
Is that right?
Yes, Dad worked at Oak Ridge. He started at K-25 just like I did, and worked there for a few years, and I think it was 1962 he got laid off and then went to ORNL, and that's where he finished his career, very much like I did. I started at K-25, worked there 9 years and a week, and went to ORNL in 1985 and finished my career there, 45 years worth.
Is that right?
That's correct. And so I was second generation.
So what did your dad do?
He was a chemical operator.
Was he? Okay.
Yeah, he worked in the process plant at K-25, and then he worked in the liquid waste at ORNL. And I guess my most vivid memory of him being employed there, Christmas Day of 1963, Dad had a real bad stomach ulcer, and when we were kids, and I was in the 2nd grade, and Christmas Day of 1963, they called from the lab, and Dad's stomach had just blown out like a bad tire.
Oh my!
He was actually out working, and in those days, the chemical operators didn't have radios, of course, no cell phones and all that kind of stuff. And he somehow or another got himself back in the pickup truck that he was driving, drove back up a hill to their control room, and the fellow that was working in the control room seen him trying to get out of the truck and seen he was in trouble, and got in the truck, left the control room, pushed him over to the side, and back in those days, they had a nurse on 24/7 at the lab, and drove him down to the dispensary, and the nurse called an ambulance.
Yeah.
And the ambulance, they called from the lab and told Mama to have a doctor at the house. They brought him to the house, and I've never understood why they brought him to the house instead of taking him straight to the hospital. But they brought him to the house, and Dr. Moorfield was there.
Yeah.
Gave him a double shot of morphine and sent him to UT Hospital. And they, Dr. Dabbs rebuilt his stomach.
Yeah.
And he was there for quite a while, about 3 weeks. And the typical after surgery stuff, they wanted him to eat some solid food and you know, and process that. And you know, when that was okay, they was going to let him come home. Well, the real food tasted so good to him, he overate and blew his stitches in.
Yeah.
So I had to go back in and fix it again.
Oh, my goodness.
So he was in the hospital for about 8 weeks, and he was 6 months, you know, getting over that in those days. Came home with 6 drain tubes coming out of his abdominal cavity.
My goodness.
And to the day he died, he would still occasionally have stitches to work out that were stitched internally, and he'd get a little festered up place on his belly. Yeah. And
you know, that it's interesting that you tell that story. My dad, of course, he worked at the steam plant, and he had an accident and broke both of his legs. And he laid in the living room for 6 weeks. Once, I don't remember if it was this. I think we were in school when that happened. But Dr. Hoffmeister would come see him every morning on his way to work and stop and see him every afternoon on his way home from work every day.
Yeah, just check on him.
Just to check on him.
Yeah.
You don't see that anymore.
No, you sure don't. It's just like
they wouldn't let him.
Dr.
anymore.
Moorfield being on Christmas Day.
Oh yeah, sure.
You know, Christmas
exactly.
Day he came out, you know, and called UT Hospital and told them that he was on his way. And there was snow on the ground.
Yeah.
And in the winter of '63, from about a week, and I remember talking, you know, Mom and Dad talking about this, from about a week before Christmas till probably middle of February, there was some snow on the ground.
Is that right?
That whole month of January to end of February, you know. And so for basically 2 months, there was some snow. No, it wasn't always covered, but all of the snow didn't get gone until late February, you know.
Yeah, I can remember growing up. We always had snow.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd have 4 or 5 good snows a year, you know, something like that.
Yeah. So, but you know, that was, and then of course, Dad retired when he turned 62, and that's what I had planned to do. Yeah. And they talked me into staying a little longer to train a new supervisor.
Right.
So I ended up staying 45 years.
So you got siblings.
Got a sister, Jill, and a brother, Mark.
Right.
Jill's 3 years older, Mark's 6 years younger. And so they're, you know, still with us and still doing well. And but
you went to Cherokee.
I did.
School. Tell me about your memories of Cherokee.
Well, in those days,
because we lived close.
Right. Yeah. You know, we walked to school, obviously. You know, it wasn't the 5 miles uphill both ways or anything in the snow. But we did walk, and we walked from where we lived, what they call the path. We walked up and there's a house built in the middle of the path now.
So you went by in front of the McCord's
house,
hit the path,
and went up the hill, and unless it was pouring down rain and the creek was flooded, you couldn't ford the creek if the creek was flooded. So you'd walk around the road. But went to Cherokee, and Cherokee was elementary then. Yeah, and of course, and basically Cherokee was built because of Cherokee Hills. Yeah, you know. And when they was developing Cherokee Hills and all the kids moved in. When I was a freshman in high school, the school bus changed from going all the way around Woodlawn and coming up Willowbrook and going back around Woodlawn and coming up Hillcrest, I believe. But when I was a freshman in high school, when the school bus stopped and everybody just kind of gathered on our carport in case there was, you know, rainy or whatever, there was, if everybody was there that day, there was 21 kids that got on the school bus at one stop.
At one stop.
That's how many kids were in Cherokee Hills.
Well, I tell people all the time, I said, there was a point when I was growing up on Hillcrest Lane, there were 100 kids under the age of 18 that lived on Hillcrest Lane.
Yeah.
Because everybody had 3 or 4 or 5.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And
So-
it's the same way with Willowbrook and
Oh, yeah,
Woodlawn and
yeah.
Meadowview and
So, yeah, I mean,
King Street.
you know, the Cherokee Hills filled up Cherokee School.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, sure did. And but good memories there. Mr. Jim Giles was the principal and had good teachers. Thinking of memories from Cherokee School, the day John F. Kennedy was killed.
Yep.
They put it on the loudspeaker, the
Yep.
radio broadcast, and I had Miss Momquist, Dr. Momquist, who was a veterinarian here for years.
Yeah.
His mother was my second grade teacher, and I remember her crying
Yeah.
over that situation, and they let us out of school early that day.
Yeah.
to go home.
I remember I was in first grade, and Miss
Yeah.
Trapp,
Yeah,
when that
Miss
happened.
Lillian Trapp. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, and.
Yeah.
But I had Miss Holbrook in the first grade, and Miss Momquist, and Miss Dake, and I can almost name you all of them, and I remember later, many years later, our kids from First Baptist were Christmas caroling at Jamestown.
At Jamestown.
And Jim and Eva Giles both. Eva was my sixth grade teacher.
Yeah.
And they were
They
both there.
lived
And
there.
I knocked on the door, and she said, I said, "Do you remember who I am?" And she said, "I should, but I'm sorry, I don't remember." I said, "You don't remember Jack Adams?" She threw her hands up and said, "Oh, Jim, come here." Of course, my mom substituted for Jim a lot.
Of course, she taught math in the middle and junior high.
Was it math?
Was it
I had her for Tennessee history
Oh, maybe it was.
because that's the first time I ever watched the Alvin York.
Oh
movie.
yeah.
And it's one of my favorites.
Yeah. So anyway, but she did teach at the junior high.
Yeah, she did, and our seventh grade year because she thought she was done with me.
Oh, yeah.
And I showed up at middle school,
Oh yeah.
She went, "Oh no, what have I done?" So
So talk a little bit more. What was it like growing up in Cherokee Hills
it was amazing.
at that time? We're talking the
Yeah,
60s.
it was amazing. We would have a football game or a baseball game or a basketball game almost every day in our yard usually.
Yeah.
Our yard or the McLeod's yard or we had some kind of sport going, and if it was too muddy, we played in the street.
Yeah.
And because there wasn't a whole lot of traffic then.
Yeah, sure.
And the apartments and stuff wasn't below down there, and Mobile Drive wasn't down below there. And but it was amazing, lifetime memories, and some of them have gone on,
Yeah.
And I remember when Bud DeBoard got killed down at TVA Bellefonte, and in a construction accident. It was, it was like the whole neighborhood was involved in the funeral. Almost,
Sure.
It's like he was like the first of us that had gone. you know.
Yeah.
And it was a sad day, on Willowbrook Drive and all of Cherokee Hills when Bud got killed. And of course, several have gone on since then. But it was just great. My friends and stuff that ones that are still with us today, or it's almost like family.
Yeah, sure.
They really are. And
We're all old, but that's all right.
I run into Cecil Murr the other day down at Walgreens.
Is that
and First
right?
time I'd seen Cecil in a while. And the Murr family moved in about probably 1963, because I remember my brother was just a little fella when they moved there. And we grew up together, and we would we'd have bonfires in the backyard.
Oh, yeah,
and,
sure.
And we one of the big treats for us back in those days, Dad always popped popcorn just in an old pot, and we'd had a little picnic table on the carport there, and we'd put down a piece of newspaper, and he'd pour it out there, and we'd sit there and eat popcorn, and Mom would fix Kool-Aid or whatever, and that was Cherokee Hills, and
it really was that sense of it takes a village.
Oh, yeah.
Jody talked about, Jody McLeod, when I talked with him, he says, it wasn't, if you were misbehaving, it didn't matter if it was your mother or somebody else's mother.
It did not.
They would jerk a knot in you.
Yeah.
And the other mothers expected that.
Yeah, yeah. And it didn't matter if if it was Miss McLeod, Miss Murr, Miss Christopher, or Miss Marksberry, or whoever growing up, Miss Cooley next door. It didn't matter if you misbehaving. You got a knot jerking your tail. You know, and like I say, the other moms expected that. It wasn't like we're going to sue you. For spanking our kid or. But that's just what was expected, and it really was the village.
Yeah. Now, did you start sports when you were in?
I played Little League baseball.
Okay.
And then when I got out of past the 12-year-old, I started umpiring.
Oh, did you?
At 13 years old.
Oh, okay.
I started umpiring. My first thing was like a lot of people did t-ball.
Yeah.
The first, my brother played on the first year they had t-ball is when he was 6 years old.
Yeah, because when I started when I was 5, and it was, I don't know what they called it, pee-wee or something. It wasn't t-ball.
Now we played pee-wee ball.
Yeah, it was real baseball.
Yeah, real baseball. It wasn't t-ball.
Yeah, it wasn't t-ball.
And, Mark and them played t-ball when he was 6, and they played down. There was a field down. You went down and turned on Bailey Road off of Paint Rock, and then there was a drive, and it was in that field, Mr. Thomas's field, and he let them mow out a baseball field.
Is that right?
They put up a little backstop, and that's the first year they had t-ball. That's where they played.
That's where they played.
And then they built the field behind the t-ball field, and the little fields behind Cherokee School. Then and then that's where they played, and that's where I started umpiring up there.
Yeah,
and I carried that on up to where for a few years there, I had my TSSAA softball umpire card and baseball.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I umpired both of them for a few years. And I got to realizing that if I was umpiring, I couldn't watch the Yellow Jackets play, so I quit umpiring.
I understand. So once you finished elementary school, talk a little bit about the junior high. What was your junior high experience? And that was just 7th and 8th grade.
7th and 8th grade in the old Alamo.
Yeah.
A lot of people, older folks, will remember the Alamo where the band practices now.
Yeah.
That was the band practice field was the old Alamo. And and
they called it that because it looked like the Alamo.
It looked like the Alamo, old white building.
Old white building.
Yeah, and
it was probably condemned when we went there.
It probably should have been. I don't know if that it was, but it probably should have been. It was, like I say, only 2 grades, 7th and 8th grade. And it was...
was Miss Hobgood the principal when you were there?
Evelyn Hobgood.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of good teachers, a lot of good people, as teachers and principals and everything, just like I mentioned, Mr. Giles and Sim Porter was when I was in high school, and Evelyn Hobgood was when I was in middle school, and probably she was my favorite educator all the way through school.
Is that right?
What I loved about her, she was very strict.
Yeah.
Very strict, but I was used to that at home.
Yeah.
And she didn't care if your daddy worked on the garbage truck or for his the mayor. You went with the same rules, and that's what I loved about her.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter to her, and she was a good Christian lady, and she was just. I didn't make the best grades in middle school. It was changing the classes or something, and everything. And so I struggled a little bit in the 7th grade, and she pulled me aside, just very lovingly pulled me aside and said, "You're going to do better next year, aren't you?" And everybody was afraid of me.
Oh, of course.
And I said, "Yes, ma'am, I will."
Yeah.
And I did. So and she told me that I had done much better in the 8th grade. At the end of the 8th grade year, she said, "You did much better this year."
That's good.
And I'm glad to see you, buckle down. I said, "Well, I don't know what." Because my grades were always good in elementary school. But I said, I don't know, just a new set of girls and stuff like that.
Yeah, sure, of course. Now, did you play basketball or anything like that?
No, I went out for basketball my freshman year in high school, and I made the team that year, but in my sophomore year, I got cut. So I just became the main cheerleader. So,
In middle school is so funny. One of the things that I remember about that, and I don't remember the guy's name, but he lived in our neighborhood. He was older. He came in and he was a new teacher. I think he taught English. But I remember him saying in class one day, using the word damn. And that was we couldn't believe it. We couldn't believe that somebody was coming into our class and cussing in seventh grade. But he lived around Woodlawn. His family they lived on Woodlawn, I remember, but I don't remember his name. But I think he was kind of a hippie type kind of guy. Yeah. But yeah, and that was the first, because we didn't have any black students at Cherokee, as I recall.
I don't recall.
But when we went to the middle school, the junior high, that was the first time that we had black students in our classes with us.
Exactly. It's the same way with me. And I'm like you, I don't remember any at Cherokee.
Yeah, I don't remember any at Cherokee.
I remember when I was in the second grade at Cherokee, that's another memory, they closed the old Cave Creek School.
Okay.
And they brought, in the middle of the day.
Really?
And I don't know if they met there at Cave Creek and then they brought them to Cherokee.
Yeah.
But I remember that some of the kids came in barefooted.
Is that right?
Yeah, they came in with no shoes. Well, I'm sure that Miss Momquest probably called my mama. Mm-hmm. And I guess mama called some of the other mamas.
Yeah.
Because the next day, them kids had shoes on.
Is that right? Is that right?
And,
wow.
They might not have been the prettiest shoes, might not have been brand new shoes, but they had shoes on.
They had shoes on.
They had shoes on. It sure did.
Wow.
And that just was my mama,
Oh, yeah,
She was going to take care of everybody if she could.
Oh, sure.
Before my dad got sick in 2002, Mom and Dad delivered on Thursdays. Of course, my mama loved to cook, and she never learned how to gear down her cooking after we left home.
Right.
So she always had tons of leftovers.
Yeah,
And so her and Dad delivered meals to the shut-ins.
Is that right?
Yeah. And just all over the community, most of them from their church. They went out to Cedar Grove, but the shut-ins. And before Dad got sick, they delivered 38 meals every Thursday.
Is that right?
And they'd load them in the trunk and take them out in the little clamshells and deliver 38 meals on Thursdays. And then Dad got sick, and of course, Mom didn't have time to do it.
Because that's what you were supposed to do.
Yeah, you took care.
You took care of people.
That's what God's Word tells you to do.
That's exactly right.
So that's what she was going to do, and Dad too. And it's like Dad garden. He loved to share his garden. And I think that's the reason the good Lord blessed him with a good garden every year. And he was a great gardener. But sometimes other folks' garden would be, dry weather would hit or something. And his would keep growing.
Is that right?
Yeah. He would just keep growing, keep producing.
My
green
goodness.
beans and tomatoes and potatoes and, whatever. And onions. And he was good at all of it. So.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your high school experience.
Okay.
So you graduated in 74?
74.
That's right. So you were here from about 70 to 74, probably the fall of 70 to 74. What was high school like for you? Because I remember you in high school. You were a year ahead of me. But I remember you being a pretty popular guy.
Well, I guess I was.
You got involved, didn't you?
I was the class president, class 74. I had a big mouth. Yeah. But I was always trying to be nice to folks. I wasn't a smart aleck big mouth.
Right.
And I got to where that I was kind of the yell leader. I wasn't a cheerleader, but I was a yell leader in the stands. And, and it was sort of funny because the cheerleaders would kind of
rely on you, wouldn't they?
Rely on me to see what we was going to do next. It was a lot of fun. Don't get me wrong. It was I had a blast and well, in high school there are kids that are really kind of natural leaders, and you were really one of those. Yeah. Well, I think I got that personality from my mom, and Dad was real quiet, but we were always taught to treat folks like we wanted to be treated.
Right.
And you mentioned black students, and Mom and Dad was raised in northeast Alabama on Sand Mountain. And when I was a kid, that was probably the most prejudiced place I'd ever been in my life.
Really?
And but we were never taught that.
Yeah.
We were never taught that. I remember Mr. Leander Woods was a concrete finisher in these parts, and he did all those concrete ditches coming down Willowbrook.
Yeah.
And Mom and Dad had him to do our driveway.
Yeah.
And redo our carport. And he was out there pouring. Well, if you was at Mama's house, you were going to eat.
Yeah.
And I remember Dad coming out, and he worked shift work, so he was home during the day some. And he came out and told Mr. Leander and two of his boys, and then had another young man that was with him pouring concrete.
Yeah.
And he said, he told Mr. Woods, he said, come on in, Nell just got lunch cooked.
Yeah.
And Mr. Woods, and I'll never forget this, if I live by 100, he said, well, we're kind of dirty, pouring this concrete. And he said, we'll just eat out here on the carport. And Dad said, no, you'll come to the table and sit down. Mama, she's gone to the trouble of cooking. He said, you need to come in here at the table and sit down. And if my memory, that's the first black folks that ever ate, that was ever in our house that I can remember.
Yeah.
And super nice folks. One of the Woods boys just died here just recently, and but I can remember when I was a kid. They were really just, and that
they poured our concrete pad on Dad when Dad was building our house. The back porch concrete.
Yeah.
They did that.
And Mr. Leander's poured, pretty much all the concrete around here in those days.
Sure.
And that really set a tone in me that, it's not the color of your skin.
Yeah.
It's your heart and your manners, and those men were just as nice and as mannerly and good Christian men and.
But now at our age, when we look back at that, can you have some real sense of I don't want to say sympathy, but you want to have a feeling about what was it like for our black classmates at that time in our country.
Yeah.
What was it like for them and their families in that time, just right after integration and having to adjust to this? It must have been really, really tough.
It must have been.
It really must have been.
And I can remember. Of course, I don't remember it personally, but I remember Mom and Dad talking about it. And I think you actually did a video on the when the Clinton High School was bombed, and Mom knew those students because we lived when I was born. They lived right across, and it was Hillcrest. That we lived on, and they lived right across the road there from the black community.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and that's where they grew up, and
so she knew those families.
She knew those kids that were involved in that. What was Clinton? The
Clinton 12.
Clinton 12. Yeah. She knew those kids, and because she made friends out of them.
Yeah.
And of course, Mom was 19 when Mom and Dad got married, so they moved up here when Mom was about 20 years old. So those kids wasn't much younger than her.
No.
And she found one of their billfolds one day. They got off the school bus there, and she found one of their billfolds. They dropped their billfold, and the next day she hollered at and said, I found a billfold. If you can identify it, I'll give it to you. And that made friend. And she befriended a black lady that lived there, and she had a car. Mom and Dad didn't have a car when they lived in Clinton for a while. And when my sister was born, one of the black neighbors took Mom to Oak Ridge Hospital. Mom and Dad to Oak Ridge Hospital when Jill was born. Yeah, and that's where we met the Coolies that lived next door to us there on Willowbrook for years and years and years. My mom and Miss Cooley, when Don and Jill were born on the very same day in Oak Ridge Hospital.
Oh, really?
And my mama and Miss Roberta Cooley shared a hospital room. And then when we moved to Cherokee Hills, they were next door neighbors.
Is that right?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Small world,
It is a small
world.
And
of course, they grew up together, had birthday parties together up till they was 12 years old, I guess.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
But we just... I'm very thankful that, we weren't taught that. It's not, but, going back to the high school, Have so many friends. We just had our 50-year reunion.
Yeah.
So much fun.
Oh, yeah.
So much fun. And the only comment I heard about it was it was too short.
Yeah.
It's too short. Didn't get to visit with everybody. I
Right.
tried to speak to everybody, but I didn't get
Yeah.
to go and visit with everybody.
Oh, sure, sure.
And some of them I hadn't seen since we graduated.
Oh, yeah.
Some of them came. And, but it was really a lot of fun. And, we had, in 50 years, there was 33 of us that had passed away.
Oh, yeah.
And since that was just a couple of months ago, and we've had two more to pass away. So it's
since
35 of us
Yeah.
gone out of 183 that graduated.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, we're planning ours for next May.
yeah.
So
well,
but-
you'll have a ball. So
we'll, and we're trying to collect, find out where everybody is. We've had a few, through the years.
right.
We're trying to find out who's still with us.
Our
who's
senior
not.
year is when Kingston won the state championship in
Yep.
football,
Yep.
and of course that was kind of the highlight of the year.
That was the highlight of the year.
Yeah, for the whole community.
Sure, of course.
And of course they'd fallen short the 2 years previous.
Yeah.
Our sophomore and junior year they got beat in the finals.
Oh, yeah.
And we finally got over that hump. And I remember when Curtis Bunch scored the winning touchdown in overtime. We were at Tennessee Tech, and
Yeah.
I don't know. It seemed like a 10-foot drop down to the field if you went over the rail.
Yeah.
And I jumped over that rail just like it was nothing, and it was 10 degrees that night.
Oh, wow. Jody talked the other day. He says, Tony, his brother Tony was on that team.
Yeah, he
he
was
says,
on
and
that
he to this day still reminds him
Yeah.
that he was on the team.
Yeah.
So Jody was on the one that
Yeah.
almost got it.
Yeah, our sophomore year.
Yeah.
He was on that team,
But,
and was a good player.
So who were some of your teachers that you remember in high school?
In high school, Miss Quimby.
Yeah.
I love Miss Quimby. Let's see, who else? Miss Harris, who just recently passed away.
She just passed away, yeah.
And
She was like 93.
yeah, she had some age on her. But of course, Miss Quimby just passed away a couple years ago.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. And me and Miss Quimby's daughter Nancy, we graduated together. I was her escort for homecoming, and Nancy has since passed away. And we had a lot of fun. And but some of the other Beecher Bell, Miss Brown. I never did have Katie Banker.
Yeah.
I missed her. I missed
either.
her somehow.
Yeah.
But she was a sweetheart. She was a dandy. And
Yeah.
But let's see who.
Did you ever have Miss Wassam?
I had Miss Wassam her first year.
That's what I was
Yeah.
thinking. She came while I was in high school.
Yeah, her first year. I was in her English class with her, and you remember little things that sticks out. And my old buddy Jim Spence, he dipped school from middle school on, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
That's when I first remembered Jim was from middle school, because he went here in the elementary school.
Yeah.
And of course I went to Cherokee, but we made buddies, fishing buddies, and everything. And he loved it. Still does. Still dips. And he had dipped skull in Miss Wassam's class. She said, "Jim Spence, have you got skull in your mouth?" "Yes, ma'am." And he ain't gonna lie to you.
Yeah.
She said, "Well, come up here and spit it out." The garbage can, threw it out. And but he could sit all the way through class and not spit.
And not spit.
No. I guess he swallowed it. I don't know what he done. But she, next day or two, and she said when he was walking back from the garbage can, she said, "Jim Spence, if you dip in my class again, I'm going to make you swallow it. I'm going to break you from dipping in my class." He went and sat down. He didn't pay attention. Next day, or maybe the next, he had a dip skull.
Yeah.
Always did. He didn't do this.
Yeah,
he just had a dip.
Right.
Jim Spence, you got a dip of skull?" "Yes, ma'am." Said, "What'd I tell you?" "You told me you was going to make me swallow it." She said, "Well, swallow it. I'm going to break you from dipping my glass." He just took his tongue, raked it up, and swallowed it.
Oh, my
right
goodness.
Then, didn't gag or anything. He just swallowed it. He swallowed his whole dip.
Yeah.
She sat there a few minutes. She got up, got sick.
Oh, is that right?
She had to go out.
That's funny.
When she went out, he got his.
Oh yeah, sure. The one of the things, and I'll talk to my kids. I'll tell them stories about when I was in school here, and one of them that they can't believe because it's not, it's not really it's not popular with young people. Thank goodness. Of course, they all vape, but there was a time when we were in high school that some of the senior boys and the teachers would go out and smoke together.
Oh yeah, on these steps right back.
Yeah.
Whatever they're at now, out of the old school.
Oh yeah.
That was a smoking area.
Oh yeah.
That was a designated smoking area. And it's like I remember you was talking about Cherokee earlier. When I was in the 5th grade, there was a young man that drove to school that was in the 6th grade.
Is that right?
Yeah, and I remember he drove in, had a '55 Chevrolet, and Jim Giles come down there and was, fussing at him. And he said, well, why can't I drive? The teachers do. He said, you don't have a driver's license. He said, yes, I do. And he was 16 years old in the 6th grade.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And he had a driver's license. And that's the last year I remember him being in school.
Really?
But he had a driver's license in the 6th grade. He drove a '55 Chevrolet to school. We thought it was cool.
That's kind of like Jeff Foxworthy. You might be a redneck if your dad walks you to school because you're both in the same grade.
Yeah. Yeah, both. But he sure did. But just in the smoking area and stuff. It's the culture.
Yeah.
Is so much different.
Oh yeah.
And I had a job at the old Browder hardware store.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
tell me about that.
I would get on the school bus. Mr. Kirk Jackson was our school bus driver.
Right.
Get on the school bus. And he would go around, get on the dike, go down, stop by Browder's. I'd get off and work until they closed at 5:30 or 5:45.
Yeah.
When we'd close. So I'd help Foch and Palmer put all the lawnmowers and wheelbarrows back inside, and everything, make sure the stove was safe if it was cold weather.
Yeah.
And we'd lock the doors, and I'd start walking home. And I worked there for 2 years. I walked all the way home one time. Somebody stopped and picked me up. Usually before I got out of
Kingston.
Of course, being the cheerleader in high school, the cheerleaders would get out of practice,
Oh yeah, yeah.
And one of the cheerleaders would pick me up.
Right.
Karen Butler or
yeah.
One of them would pick me up and bring me home.
Bring you home.
And I'd work there. That was a great job. I mean, that was I learned so much.
Oh yeah.
When I went out to work for Brad and Teresa Taylor out at the news store that was out by Food City, after my dad had passed away, and somebody came in and they wanted a piece of glass cut. Teresa told me, said, take it back there on the desk and write their name on it and everything. And when Kevin comes in or somebody, we'll get them to cut it. I said, well, I can cut glass. You can. I said, yeah. So I went back there and cut their glass and come back up, took it back up there. The guy paid Teresa at the cash register. And she goes, how'd you learn how to cut glass? And I said, Fox and Palmer taught me how. Oh, okay. Well, like the next Saturday or whatever I was working, somebody come in and they wanted a window screen put in.
Yeah.
She said, take that back there and put it. That's why I put a screen in. That ain't nothing. So I went back there and put the screen in nice and straight and everything. She said, where'd you learn to do that? And I said, Foch and Palmer taught me how. So a little later that same day in the afternoon, somebody come in and wanted pipe threaded. And she said, see if so-and-so's back there. And I said, well, I'm
thread a
pipe. So that's easy. We got that big rigid machine back there. I said, that's no problem. She goes, Foch and Palmer? I said, of course. I said, Foch and Palmer taught me how. He taught me how to blacksmith.
Oh, wow.
We'd make fireplace pokers out of that old potbelly stove that's there. Where you'd put some rebar in there and go back there and hammer on it until it cooled down and go heat it again. And,
wow.
He could do anything.
Yeah.
He was a good electrician. Only person I ever seen that could handle 110 volt electricity barehanded.
Really?
Yes. And it did not shock him.
Wow.
I've never seen anybody that could do that. And like granite, if you ever grabbed a spark plug wire on a lawnmower.
Oh yeah.
Go all the way to your shoulder.
Sure.
He could ground out a lawnmower, kill it.
Is that right?
And not flinch.
Wow.
His body makeup, I don't know, his old rough skin or something.
Yeah, something.
I've never seen anybody could do that. And he wired our, when we closed our carport in, he came and wired it in for Mom and Dad and didn't turn electricity off. He just came off a live circuit and put in the new thing, put in the light switch. Things sparked.
Lord, I had to change out a light switch the other day, and I about turned the electricity off to the whole house.
Yeah, he could do it.
Yeah.
And we were there one day, and he was putting a new fluorescent light above the cash register.
Yeah.
And it threw a spark, and there was a hardware salesman there. Didn't have computers to order it on then.
Yeah, sure.
The salesman came around and made out your order.
Yeah.
And it's hardware salesman there, and he said, "Bill, is that live?" And he said, "Yeah." And he said, you can't do that live without getting hurt. And Bill just dropped the Romex wire down, and he said, "Well, check it." And the guy was silly enough to reach up and grab both sides of that wire, and he landed on his back.
Oh, my goodness. What was? Tell me about growing up in Kingston and, outside of school. There were downtown, were there places that y'all went? And
Emory Five and Dime, Western Auto, Armours.
Yeah.
And then Duncan Agee.
Yeah.
And
did you ever go to the pool hall?
No.
My
mom and dad were too strict me to go to the pool hall.
No, that was a rough place, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't that where the bakery is now?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
Well, actually,
or was it next door that building's tore down, next to Baggett's?
no. It was either there or where Duncan Agee is built.
Oh,
now.
is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, right.
Yeah,
right,
I think they tore down the old pool hall too.
Yeah.
And but I knew a lot of people that went there.
Oh yeah.
And they would talk about it, but we weren't allowed to go.
Yeah, we weren't.
We weren't allowed to go to the pool.
We weren't even allowed to walk in front of it,
yeah,
basically.
Yeah, but we would, and growing up, we'd ride our bicycles to town.
Yeah.
That was no big deal. And I couldn't, and we didn't go down Pole Road. We went down
Morrison Hill.
You know, and I couldn't imagine letting a 10 or 12-year-old kid do that today with the traffic.
Sure.
But we didn't. And we'd ride our bikes to Green Acres to fish, and to Crestwood to fish.
Oh yeah.
And I remember being down where the Lakeside Golf Course is now. When I was just, golly, I couldn't have been 6 or 7 years old. I rode my bicycle down there to fish in that cove.
Right.
And they were doing some work up there with a bulldozer. And stuff. And I thought, what are they doing? So that's before Dad had a boat. So the next time me and Dad were down there, we drove down there and parked on the side of the road. And Dad said, "Reckon what they're doing?" And I said, "I don't know." So we went up there and knew a couple of the neighbors that lived up through there. And I said, "They're building a golf course," and that was my first recollection of Lakeside Golf Course.
Right?
Yeah. And a golf course.
Yeah.
Why do you need a golf course?
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
But Kingston was a lot of fun. New, especially, but probably by the time I got in high school, knew 75% of the people in town.
Oh, sure.
Or knew of them. And,
sure.
That's the reason I never walked home from Browders.
Right.
Too many people knew me, and it was a type of town. I was telling somebody just yesterday of how I got on at K25. I told you I started umpiring, and it was a preseason 9 and 10-year-old tournament at Cherokee Field.
Yeah.
And I'd been kneeling down, getting down behind them little 9 and 10-year-old kids, and of course I was 19 years old, I guess.
Yeah.
And 19 might have already turned 20, but I was down there, and it's kind of getting to my back.
Oh, sure.
Just kneeling down and getting all the way down behind them little kids so he'd call a fair strike zone.
Yeah.
And I went over, between innings, and Mr. Jim Miller there, his wife used to work for Don Davis in the veterinarian office, and Miss Carrie, and he said, "What's the matter, Jack?" I said, "Oh, getting to me, kneeling down behind them little boys and everything." He said, "You want a real job?" I said, "Yeah, where?" And he said, "K25. And I said, "Oh, I'd love to have a job at K25. He said, "Well, get me a carbide application and I'll take it in for you." I said, "I got one task, just got to put a date on it." And he said, "Well, you get a chance, go get it." And I held the ball game up. Of course, just lived down in Willowbrook. I
Oh,
ran
yeah.
down there,
Sure.
got the application, put the date on it, ran it back, and handed it to him.
Yeah.
Well, that was like on a Saturday. On Monday, he went in, and when his big boss was leaving, he caught him, coming out in the hall, and he handed it to him. He said, "This is a good guy. You need to give him a job.
Yeah.
I know you're going to hire some technicians." So the guy was leaving. He just stuck it in his briefcase. Well, go back a little bit, a month or so before that, they used to have a little children's theater here, and you may have taken part in it. I don't know. And I know you've always loved this kind of stuff, but at a children's theater, and they were going to do a talent show. And this lady called me, didn't know her from Adam. She said, "Understand you're, kind of a clown." And I said, "Well, yeah." And the microphone don't bother you? And I said, no. And she said, "Would you MC this talent show for me?" And I said, "Well, sure." She goes, "Just ham it up, have a good time." She says, "We're going to do it 2 times. It's not a paying gig." I said, "That's not a problem,
Right.
So anyway, I come down and do it. We had a lot of fun. It's in here in the old auditorium in this building, know. And so we had a lot of fun and everything. Well, fast forward again 2 months, and her husband was the one that Mr. Miller had handed my resume to.
Is that right?
He goes home that night and doing some paperwork at the dining room table. She brings him a cup of coffee. And the old carbide applications had your name right on the front.
Right.
And she said, she's seen it, and he tells me this story later. Said, "Is that the Jack Adams we know?" He said, "I don't know. Somebody just handed me that." Said, I hadn't even looked at it. So she picks it up. She goes, "Yeah, you need to give this guy a job."
Is that right?
Well, I got me an interview, and, I got my job and went to work out there in August of 1976. I was 20 years old. And so that,
now,
that was just
were
good
you
Lord
just
taking care of a
working,
fool.
had you gone to college?
I was at Rome State.
Oh, you were at Rome State.
Yeah, I was at
Okay.
Rome State. And, my sister, Jill, is the first graduate ever of Rome State Community College.
Oh, I guess so, because her
name being Adams.
Yeah.
And they started it the year she graduated here in 71.
Yeah.
And so she was in the first class. And
Is that right?
She went straight through, and she was the first person to ever get a diploma.
Is that right?
That's a pretty good little chunk of history in this part of the world.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And she's mentioned in the record book.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
That is amazing.
Yeah, first person.
I'll need to tell them that, because they'll want to do something with that.
Yeah,
I bet.
Yeah, that's she's the first graduate ever of Rome State Community College.
Wow.
And
wow.
Yeah.
So you went to work at K25.
You're right.
And you said you're there 9 years.
9 years and a week.
In a week.
Yeah.
And then you went to the lab.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And how that happened, DOE was shutting down the centrifuge. They never completely shut it down. Matter of fact, they're fixing to build a big new plant at K25 site.
Yeah, exactly.
So they never got rid of it completely. But they jerked the money, DOE jerked the money out from under it.
Yeah.
And so we were all getting laid off, I had gone to Y12 and interviewed for a guard's job.
Right.
And, I was trying to make a living.
Sure.
And I went and shot my gun. I did my run and did my physical. And I was just waiting on them to call the next round of them in.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I was working on my resume, and we mentioned Miss Quimby, and I was good friends with her husband, Tom. And I called Mr. Tom, and he's very well thought of at the lab at the time, and probably one of the most intelligent men I've ever worked around. But anyway, I called Mr. Tom, and I said, "Tom, you mind if I put your name on my resume as a reference?" He said, "Well, no. What do you done it? Not at all." I said, "What are you doing a resume for?" And I said, "We're about to get laid off." He said, "Well, you get that resume done, bring it over here." And this is, again, another story of the good Lord taking care of a fool.
Sure.
Just like getting an interview at K25.
Yeah.
So I was almost done with it. Miss Doris Kroll was our secretary, and she finished typing it up for me and made me some copies. And I got the company van, and I went to X10. There's the old 5000 portal there. Guard who's since passed away, Mr. Husky, and I looked at his badge and I said, "Mr. Husky, can you tell me where building 3550 is?" He said, "Yeah, come out here in the street." I pulled out on Central Avenue there. He said, "See the old gray building down there on the left?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, who you looking for? I said, Tom Quimby. Yep, that's where he's at, you know.
Okay.
So I motored down there, went in, and Tom looked at my resume. He said, let's go across the street and talk to my boss. And I said, I had on a softball T-shirt and a pair of blue jeans, you know,
Right.
tennis shoes. And I said, well, I ain't really dressed for an interview. And he said, he'll love your T-shirt. He's a softball player. I said, okay. So we go over there, and he walks in, and Mr. Harold Adair, very, very nice man, just passed away a few years ago. And he hands me my resume, and he said, give this guy a job. And Mr. Adair said, how come? He said, because I said so. I thought, Tom, please, I need a job.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
So Mr. Adair looks at it, and he said, Jack, this is Thursday. I can't get the paperwork through to get you over here by Monday. Will a week from Monday be okay? And I was so dumbfounded. I said, are you serious? And he said, yeah, I can't get it through to get you over here Monday, but I can get you over here a week from Monday. And I said, that'd be great.
Yeah.
So I go back and I call Lisa, and it was a long distance call in those days.
Oh, yeah,
you know,
sure.
Call from Oak Ridge.
Yeah.
So I called Lisa, and if you had an excuse, you could. You know.
Yeah, sure.
So I called Lisa and I said, hey, got a job. You going to Y12? No. Going to X10. She goes, as a guard? I said, no. She said, what are you going to be doing? I said, don't know. She goes, hey, you know you got a job. I said, well, the man told me I did. She goes, well, what are you going to be doing? I said, I don't know. I said, I got to be there a week from Monday. And so I called my dad. He still worked out there.
Yeah.
And he said, what are you going to be doing? I said, I don't know. So he said, well, hey, you know you got a job. I said, well, man told me, come over a week from Monday and I'd have a job. And back in those days, you could just go from plant to plant with the same badge. You didn't have to change badges or nothing.
Exactly.
So anyway, he said, well, what building you going to be in? I said, I don't know. I said, I don't remember what building that was we went to. And he said, well, describe it. And I told him, and he said, well, that's 3047 building. You're going to be working in the hot cells. And he said, that's a good job. I said, okay. He said, it's kind of dangerous. I said, that's all right. So anyway, that was my getting. And then in 1997, they did what they call the tri-party split.
Yeah.
They split up some of the responsibilities.
Sure.
What's now UCOR and UT Battelle. And
and all that.
all that, and the Y12 split and all that kind of stuff. That happened in 97. Well, UCOR bunch, it was West Kent and them, but it was UCOR sub, and they were going to take over the barrel ground where I worked at the time.
Right.
And the lab was going to keep a small group, about 30 of us, kinds of catch net, to take care of the new generated waste and all that kind of stuff. Well, the way they wrote the descriptions for the job, it was all for hazardous waste. The only thing I'd ever worked in was rad waste.
Right.
And so the guy that was going to be our boss, our big boss, Mr. Butch Edgman from down in Meigs County, he called me, he said, I hadn't seen one of your resumes yet. And I said, well, Butch, I don't know anything about haz waste. And I said, all I know is rad waste. And he said, you need to turn a resume in. And I said, Butch, I don't know anything about it. He said, I need a resume. And so I went right then and turned my resume into him. And had an interview the next day, scheduled with the guy that was going to be our division director.
Right.
So I'll go up there, and our church, you know, used to go on the building trips. We've gotten, all of us gotten too old to do that now.
Yeah.
Go up, and Mr. Pope was the guy's name, and he said, sit down, and he said, don't you go to the church in Kingston that goes and builds those churches? I said, yeah, we go every summer. Man, I'd like to do that sometime. And I said, come go with us. You don't have to go to our church to go with us. I said, come go with us. Well, we sat there and talked. And he'd already told me he had another meeting in 30 minutes.
Right.
So we started talking. He gets out this book of pictures of furniture that he'd built. Absolutely beautiful furniture. So he knew what he was doing working with wood, you know. So like that, the 30 minutes passed. And I said, you got another meeting? He said, yeah. And I said, how about the job interview? Oh, you got the job. It's just a formality.
You know, it's interesting that you tell those stories, and it's I mean, that's the way Yeah, Oak Ridge, the workforce at Oak Ridge at the plants has been such a vital part of the economy of both Anderson and Roane County. And there was a lot of people that worked up there that lived in Kingston. And, it was those relationships that you had built with those people outside of work that was able to let you make a living.
Yeah. Well, you think about Kingston in our lifetime.
Yeah.
Oak Ridge and TVA.
Yeah.
Some main providers, probably.
That's it.
I mean, I know there's a lot of other things, but that's, the bulk of the people that we knew in Cherokee Hills before you worked at Oak Ridge or TVA.
Or TVA, that's exactly right.
So
that's exactly right. So when did you get married, and who did you marry?
1982. Married Lisa Paget.
Okay.
I actually graduated with her older sister, Linda.
Right.
And Lisa is 8 years younger than me.
Yeah, she's younger.
And she had gone out with my brother.
Oh, okay. Right. Okay.
And that didn't work out real good.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember the night that Kingston got walloped by Brentwood Academy in the state finals down here when I used to play them at, at the home fields. Anyway, she sat down in front of me that night. And I'd known her all her life.
Yeah, sure.
I remember when she was born. But she was sitting there, and we were talking about her and Mark and everything.
Yeah.
And so sitting there, and of course she's a pretty lady, still a pretty lady.
Sure.
And so the ball game got over, and I said, "You want to go grab a bite to eat?" Well, yeah. So we go to her mom and dad's house because she wanted to change clothes before she went, and that was a year after she had graduated here.
Okay.
And so that was the 81 season, 81 football season. So anyway, we go, and I'm sitting in her mom and dad's den, and waiting for her to change clothes, and talking to her dad, who I knew.
Yeah, sure.
But anyway, her older Linda walks in,
Yeah.
and she looked at me, and she said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Lisa and I are going to go get a bite to eat." And she went, "Interesting."
Oh, yeah.
The rest is history.
Oh, yeah.
The rest
sure,
is history.
Sure,
so, that was the fourth day of December, and I asked her to marry me on the day before Valentine's Day in '82.
Is that right?
So we've been dating about 2 months or so.
Yeah.
And and her mom made us promise. She was 18.
Oh, yeah.
Her mom made us promise that we'd wait till she turned at least 19 to get married.
Okay.
And she is in Rome State.
Yeah,
I was working at K25.
Sure.
And so she made us promise. And she turned 19 one week, and we got married the next. We was good to our word, And
you've been married for how many years?
42.
42.
Just past 42. And, the first night we went out, Lisa told me later that when she got home that night, and when we got ready to leave, I asked Mr. Paget, I said, what time she need to be home? He said, she knows what time to be home.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So we got home, and she came in, and he was waiting up for her. He had never waited up for her after a date.
Really?
He'd always gone to bed,
Yeah.
And he said, "You have a good time?" And she said, "Yeah, had a good time." And he said, "I think I'd have a better time with him than Mark." I don't know what that was all about. I don't know what that was all about. But anyway.
That's funny.
So anyway,
right.
we like most married couples, we've had our ups and downs.
Sure.
But, it's 42 years. And she ain't shot me yet. So.
Right. I understand. I understand.
She does her music.
Yeah.
She plays the piano at church and everything, and of course I'm active at church, and I do my fishing.
Yeah.
And it meshes pretty good.
That's pretty good
together. She's never told me I couldn't go fishing. I never told her she couldn't go to a concert or go play somewhere.
That's kind of like I used to tell people when I got married, and I was almost 35 when I got married. My wife's she's 7 years, almost 8 years younger than me, but neither one of us, she was 27, 28. I was almost 35, and she grew up Methodist. And I told her, I said, "Honey," I said, "now, we'll never get divorced." I said, Now, I might take you out back and shoot you. She said, because the Baptists will forgive murder, they won't forgive divorce. So I said that to her mother. I don't think her mother appreciated that very good. But anyway.
Well,
All right, so let me ask you one question. We're going to wrap things up here.
Okay.
Did you ever think about leaving Kingston?
No, I've never crossed my mind.
Yeah.
We'll occasionally, we keep a camper down on Chickamauga Lake, down the Birchwood community. And, so occasionally we'll ride around down there and look at houses that are for sale and stuff like that. And Lisa said, would you like to live down here? And I said, it ain't Kingston. It ain't Kingston. She goes, well, what about Kingston? And I said, it ain't Kingston.
Yeah.
I said, they don't have yellow jackets down here.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. And speaking of Yellow Jackets, you continue to be a big supporter of.
Oh, yeah. I went down and watched them get thumped at Meigs County the other night. And, but, I still love watching the kids play. Don't know all the kids like I used to. You used to know everybody out there, but, and all the parents and all that kind of stuff. And, but, I don't do that. And we ran into Connie Quinn out there a while ago. I've traveled many a mile watching her play basketball and softball,
Sure.
And, but and still good friends, but this I've never just too many friends here, too many years. We sold her mom and dad's place there last year, and of course sold my mom and dad's place there on Willowbrook a few years ago now, and but.
There's just too much history here.
Just too much history. We've lived in our house in Evelyn Estates now for 31 years. So it's just, it's just, sometimes I think I'd like to have a little bigger yard, where the neighbors weren't quite so close.
Right.
But got good neighbors, but just and Evelyn Estates going through a change now. We've had several new neighbors lately. Leaving Kingston. I'm not saying I never will, but I'm getting too old to now.
Sure. Well, Jack, thank you so much for coming in and talking to me today.
Enjoyed it.
I appreciate it.
A lot of good memories.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right.